brushes. It's a multitude of them. As the professor is going to go over with you, it's going to be basically the 4 basic ones. Now, as myself, working on sets, you're working and doing stuff like this here, bead projections, whatever, but we're talking about brushes. We use a different type of brush. I use a different type of brush. It's called a pretty brush. Now, you're not going to be working on that type of brush yet. We're eventually going to get into sets, but the professor is going to talk to you about the 4 basic brushes. Is he going to talk about the fan brush? He might. The whole course on this is going to be based on brushes. Now, he talked to you about color theory, and you've gone through the primary, secondary colors, you've gone through complementary colors, split complementary colors, you've gone through analogous colors, and you've also gone over the monochromatic colors. So you've got an idea of how they work and how they're going to apply to your work. Well, now you have to be able to take those colors and apply them. And you have to take them from the tube, or you have to take them from the jar, or even from the can, and then apply them. But what are you going to apply them with? This is an important tool, the brush. And he's going to go over with you about the synthetic, the blend, and the natural brush. Now, keep in mind, this is also very important. Why? Well, let's put it this way. He's going to show you that working with a synthetic brush is not going to be as good. It's made out of nylon fibers, but I'm going to let him explain all that to you. And the blend, not that good. So it's not just simply grabbing a brush, using it, and then applying paint. He's going to explain all that. And you're going to understand better how to utilize this so that you're able to apply the paint and then work it. It's not going to be too complicated, but you're going to be able to understand. And for many of you out here, you're probably not even sure about what type of brush is what and how things work. It's a brush is not a brush. And you'll understand that at the end of this episode. So let's find the professor to see if we can locate where he is. Apparently, these guys know. Okay. And oh, look at the size of these brushes. You'll get to see how much they are. Where did you find these? These are huge. Just look at the size. Okay, later. Take care. Have a good one. And he'll be talking to you about brushes on this episode of Artifacts. See ya.
For more awesome content, like and subscribe now. Do it now, or I'll hunt you down. Smash like.
I've heard of these brushes.
Why don't you have these brushes yet?
Like nylon brushes or cheap shoes. But
Brushes.
Brush.
Then I'll brush and brush and brush and brush my hair.
and a brush.
And your brush.
And look, grab a brush.
A paintbrush too?
Canvas, stretches, brushes, turpentine.
Good day for these wet paintbrushes, too. Is the pool too warm for paintbrushes?
The paintbrush. Ha. Well, there's a lot to the paintbrush itself. What seems to be a simple tool actually goes back quite a few years. Hundreds, not thousands of years. The paintbrush is a very, very important tool in utilizing your craft in the arts. However, that's kind of changed in the 60s during the non-representational period, during the period where we saw a lot of changes in the arts. For instance, Jackson Pollock, he became the first artist, really true artist, to question why use a paintbrush. And rather than taking the paint from the paint to a brush to the canvas, he skipped the brush and just poured the paint. Now, for some of you who are thinking out there, we've talked about this before, that, oh, he's just pouring paint. Remember, even Norman Rockwell had that kind of philosophy until he tried it and realized it's not as easy as it seems. There is a methodical path in which he took. It's not just dripping paint, which we see a lot of artists do today. No, he was actually thinking of a path, wondering which to go, how to drip, how much paint to drip, what to drop. But then after that, it was other things that were used. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's called experimentation. And even myself, I'll use my fingers. And again, Bob Ross uses his fingers. I know I mention him a lot because of the fact he talks to the common person. And what's good about these videos is that I want to be able to scale this not to just one specific area, but to every artist out there who wants to just paint and have their work in their own home, and those of us who are in the professional field or are looking to pursue that, which is why I bring Bob Ross a lot, because we have a lot of professional painters and history we can show what other artists have done in the past that have actually pretty much influenced what our work is like today. All right, well, let's start off way back in the Renaissance period. What a lot of people don't understand is that the Renaissance art, well, we're talking about Caravaggio, we're talking about Michelangelo, all of these artists used what they call the round brush. They didn't have many flat brushes at that time. Most of them were the round brushes. In fact, the flat brush didn't come into existence until the Impressionist period, when Monet got the idea of flattening the brush to be able to widen the stroke out. So relatively speaking, the flat brushes are relatively new in history. They haven't been around as long as you would think they have been. So in utilizing that, you can kind of get an idea of where brushes have come and where they're headed. But there are also 4 different types of brushes. But before we get into that, let me back up a little bit. Let's talk about the materials of these brushes. And there are 3 types of materials of brushes. There is the synthetic, the blend, which is partial synthetic, part natural, and then there is the natural brush. Now, out of these 3, the best brush, still in my book, and most professionals will say, is the natural brush. Why? Well, it's natural. It comes from natural hair, such as horse hair, camel hair, squirrel hair, rabbit hair. And then, of course, there's others such as the sable. And the sable brush is even more expensive. Then you have the China white, which actually leaves no strokes on there. But those are other advanced styles of brushes that we won't be talking about. But the 4 that you want to concern yourself with, which I will go into, are the round, the flat, the bright, and the filbert. But we'll talk about those and we'll go into detail about these. But for right now, let's talk about the material of these. If you look at, here is an example of a synthetic brush. It starts to get stiffened up. Each of the bristles start to stiffen after a while. They don't hold the paint as well, and they're not as bouncy. They tend to be a little more flat. Now compare that to what we have here, which is the natural brush. This here is a natural filbert. And this filbert tends to bounce a little bit. It holds onto the paint better, but it releases. It bounces on the canvas. It gives a very soft cushion to work with. It leaves the paint behind, but doesn't drag it off the canvas, which your synthetic brushes will do. Now, synthetic brushes have come a long way, but still, synthetic brushes, at least in my book, now I could be wrong, will never be able to simulate something natural. I want to say that because I know that there have been other artists who have been wrong, and I could very well be wrong. But as far as I'm concerned, the natural brush is probably the best way to go. Now, keep in mind, years ago, natural brushes were way more expensive because they were harder to make. Today, they're easier to make, so they're going to be a little cheaper. Still somewhat expensive, but they are cheaper than what they were before. So if you're going to start working on these brushes, my highly recommendation is don't bother going to the blends, don't bother going to the synthetics. Always, always, always stick to a natural brush.
What do you mean, always?
Yes, always.
You will find that you're going to be able to handle your paint a lot better, and your work is going to come out a lot more professional, and you're not going to struggle with the paint as much. Now, we're going to talk about paint and the texture of the paint in the next episode, and that's going to be on acrylic paint. Then we're going to go into oils, but we're going to talk about their viscosity, we're going to talk about their vehicle, we're going to talk about everything that's made into that paint and why there's a difference between the student grade paint and the, well, professional grade. But all of that plays into what you're seeing here with your brushes. Working your brushes also is something that is very instrumental. Now, like for myself, I will grind and push these brushes, and so therefore I'm going to have to buy new brushes. Of course, the natural brush is going to wear down a lot faster and a lot quicker, depending on how rough you are with your brushes. But sometimes I really have to grind and push and really get those textures that I'm looking for. Textures if I'm working in a sfumato style. We'll get into that. I know I've mentioned it earlier, but we will get into that. As opposed to more the impasto, more thicker, richer type of painting. And of course, Rembrandt was also a big painter in the impasto style. But this is all dealing with your brush. The four brushes now, I guess we can get into, are going to be the four general brushes, which is going to be the filbert, the round, the flat, and the bright. The one that I use most of all is going to be the filbert. Now, the filbert was named after the filbert tree. And, well, not really after the filbert tree, it was actually the filbert nut, which is really a hazelnut. And it's kind of because it was shaped like a hazelnut, that it's got that little round shape to it, is how they were able to come up with that. Well, the filbert tree is actually named after St. Filbert, who was a monk back about the 7th century. I don't know why I'm going into that information, but anyway, it tells you, derives where the name came from. So the filbert nut is a lot like the hazelnut. This is what a filbert tree looks like, and this is what a hazelnut looks like, or a filbert nut. They're pretty much close in relation. I'm not going to get into all the differences between the two. Of course, an arborist can tell you that because that's what they work with. All right. As you can see, art starts to move into other areas. Anyway, the next one is a bright. Now, the bright brush is used in areas where it's a little wider, a little sharper, and the bristles are a little shorter than you would have with the filbert. For me, the filbert tends to lay paint down a little easier. I'm able to manipulate it a little better. The bright gives you more of a sharper edge. Out of those two, there's the flat brush, and it tends to be flatter than the filbert or the bright, and it's exactly what it means, flat. It's a flat brush. And then finally, the round. Round brush is what it says. It's a round brush. It comes out to being round, and that's what you're using it for. You can actually get a very, very small round brush, such as a 1 or maybe a 0 or even a double aught, take your paint almost in a very, very ink consistency where you can actually paint and do more detail with the round brush. Now, they come in various sizes. Now, that's another important thing too, is your size of your brush. Now, you'll notice that your brushes will start off with 1 and move all the way up to scale. The biggest brush I have is a 16. If I'm going to go any bigger than that, then I'm going to use a large, pretty brush that's going to cover the background canvas. So what do the numbers have to do with anything on the brush itself? Well, they vary. They actually tell you the length, the thickness, and the width of the brush. Now keep this in mind, there's no absolutes on the numbers. So in other words, one brand may be slightly different than the other brand. So you might have a 12, and if you're using a Grumbacher, it might be slightly bigger than a Winsor Newton. Or it may be slightly different than a Master's Touch. So really it's just to give you a general idea of what size of brushes you use. When I'm working on large canvases, which most people think of large, I call a normal size, I usually start with a 12, and I stay with the 12, going up to a 16. If I want to get any bigger, then I go into a pretty brush. Very rarely do I ever come down to a 1, unless I'm really working into small details. But I like to keep my strokes broad. I like to keep them open, to let the viewer almost immerse himself into that image. And that's the thing that you kind of want to do when you're going to get into how to stand in front of the canvas. Kind of like how I went over how to sit in front of your table when you were drawing. Because a lot of people will sit here and they come up to this right here and they're doing this when you should be at least 1 arm's distance away from your canvas. That's also going to help you to see the whole image in which you're working with. Okay, I know I'm straying off, so let's get back to brushes. So these brushes on these sizes are going to give you a general idea of how big your brushes are. For instance, if I hear a 12, I know it's going to be a larger size brush. If I go with a 6, knowing that it's not only half that size, it's a lot smaller, as opposed to a 2, then I know that that one is going to be relatively small. Again, these are just sizes to be utilized to get an idea of what framework you're going to be working in. So there's also one other brush that is used that I didn't really use until recently, which is the fan brush. Nothing bad about the fan brush. As a matter of fact, you probably saw Bob Ross using the fan brush quite a bit on how he made his trees. My wife, for instance, likes his trees, that style, a lot more than the other style I came up with. Yeah, she liked that, and you can create different styles with that. The fan brush is also used to smooth certain things out. You can kind of feather stuff out with it. If you're looking for that feathery, soft look, you can practice with that fan brush. Again, myself, very rarely, if any, have I ever used a fan brush. And again, that's not to say that the fan brush is something terrible. No, utilize it, use your fingers. There are some artists who said, ooh, you shouldn't be using your fingers. Use them. God gave you the fingers, use them. And you might find a new style that works with that. For heaven's sakes, if you want to even smear it with your whole entire hand, then do it. There's no rule that says no. I'm also in the arena of artists. If you're going to use a brush, you can also use a pellet knife. Oh, and there are some artists who will turn around and say, if you're going to use a brush, you just stay with the brush. If you can use pellet knife, stay with the pellet knife. And there are some artists, some of my professors couldn't stand pellet knife. One of the big artists that is known as Leroy Neiman, who did a lot of his work. Here's some of his work here. He was mostly known for his work for sporting events. Now, most of my professors couldn't stand his work. And a lot of reason these professors don't like these kind of works is because these artists don't develop. Okay, let me just show you. And I know this has to do that we're getting off the track about brushes, but you can see how all these kind of work together. Take a look at this work. Know who that is? Don't? It's Pablo Picasso. Yeah, that's his early work. You know his stuff as this, Cubist period, the blue period. That's what you know him as. He even did Paloma, which is just a simple line of a bird. Minimalist. one of the young ladies who I swim with, Catherine Pierce, she loves minimalism. This is the stuff she likes. Thought I'd throw out a mention out there to you, Catherine. But there are people who do like that kind of stuff that are just minimalistic. I didn't really understand this stuff here, but I do now. Creating something that in a minimal style that the viewer can get involved with. You know who is also good for that? The Japanese. Sumi brush. Look at this. Now, sumi brush is completely different. That's made out of bamboo and a whole different type of sable hair, which is utilized really well for picking up inks. And it's using just one stroke. They're also masters of calligraphy. But see, brushes are the ones that be able to do all this stuff. Okay, so I went off with Picasso, and I also went off with Leroy Neiman. But they use different tools. Leroy Neiman used a palette knife. Pablo Picasso used pencils, pens. He used, not sure if he used a palette knife. If he did, there isn't much of his work that we have, but we've seen a lot of his brush work. But let's pull back to where we were about brushes. Again, to get certain effects, you want to stay with the natural brush. Now, there are going to be some artists who disagree with me. Fine, that's okay. And if you find other tutorials where there are other artists who say that they've worked with blends, they worked with synthetics, and they've come out great, experiment. You might even turn around and find, hey, you know what? They've come out a lot. They worked out a lot better. And what I'm saying by coming out a lot, they have advanced the materials a lot more, and they're going to get better and better. But again, I'm in the corner where I say it will never reach the status of what a natural brush can do. I just don't believe it will. But you be the judge. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying it's probably better to just utilize these brushes. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into the studio, and I'm going to demonstrate these brushes and how they work. Again, I'm not going into any kind of painting technique. That's going to be next season. We're going to be on the next episode talking about acrylic paint. I'm going to be talking to you about how to look for the paints, the prices on tubes, and what you're looking for in these paints. You'll be able to understand how this all ties in with color theory, because now you're understanding the primary colors, secondary colors, analogous, monochromatic, etc., etc., knowing that black and white is not a color, and now you know that brown is a neutral color. You're arming yourselves to understand how to utilize this stuff when you start painting. Now the next step in color theory is to understand the colors and how these vehicles and the viscosity of each of these paints will help you. But in order to get from there to here, there's a gap in between, which are the brushes, which we are talking about now. And then we'll get into painting techniques. You're going to have a lot of fun with those. All right, so let's move on to the studio and start working on how the paint works. And we're going to try and take this a little slower so you can understand and see how these colors work and how the viscosity of the brush, or excuse me, the viscosity of the paint is utilized in the brush, and how laying the paint down will help you out a lot. And you'll see how in some inferior brushes they tend to smear or drag, and they really don't leave a pleasant feel to the brush. So there's going to be a lot of difference. So this is really going to help you to understand, or I should say, to be able to help you to grasp a little bit more of what we're going to do. Hello, guys. Yeah, we're heading to the studio. They're always looking for me. All right, head off to the studio. To the studio. Let's go. Oh, well, we're in the studio. Okay, I have a little something to tell you. From the time that we left the first half to now, I got hit again with being sick. I was out for a month, and turned out it was that bad strain of flu that went around. But another thing that happened was that it eventually went down into my lungs, and you can see I'm still struggling with breathing. I got hit really bad, where I could not breathe. So it was a bad strain of the flu, which eventually kicked in my asthma, and I couldn't even move. As a matter of fact, today was the first day I went back swimming after a month. And normally I swim about, between 25 to 2,600 yards. I was only able to swim 600 yards, 650 yards. So I went only 25 yards, had a rest, and then still coughing up some stuff. But anyway, that's why I've been gone for a month. There's just no way I was able to do any kind of recording. So we're going to pick up from where we left off, talking about brushes and what kind of brushes to work with. So those of you who are hanging in with me, I'm so glad you're still here. We're almost up to 140 subscribers, so hey, to me that's great. All right. Okay, so you'll see me taking a deep breath in between quite a bit, just to catch my breath and to be able to breathe. All right, so what we were talking about now is brushes and the types of brushes that we use. Now, there is an immense array of brushes. If you go all the way back in history, you'll find that brushes have changed so much. There are, like I said, the four main ones, which is the filbert, the flat, the bright, and the round, are your four basic brushes that you're going to be using. Of course, there's different types of brushes, different types of brushes that are utilized, such as a squirrel hair, hog's hair, horse hair. You also have sable brushes, which are very, very soft, which are used to picking up inks, as I said earlier. So there's an vast array of brushes. And out of those brushes, you're going to find also some synthetic brushes. Now, I said earlier, I am definitely of the artist in that corner that you can't really find a brush that is either a blend or synthetic to match a natural brush. You just can't. You can feel the differences between the two. And in fact, a lot of the brushes do look alike. They will resemble each other. I mean, now you can find a synthetic or a blend that looks a lot like a natural brush, but until you feel it, you can feel the differences between the two. All right, so what I have here, first showing you off, I have the four brushes which I use in painting. You have your filbert, you have your flat, you have your bright, and you have your round. Now, the differences between these all have a substantial usage for them, because you're going to be utilizing some of these brushes to create short, choppy strokes. Others are going to be long, and they're going to fade out. It's also going to, excuse me, it's also going to determine on whether you're using a style such as sfumato or if you're going to be more impasto. So let's talk a little bit about that, and then you've heard me talk about it. But that does go directly into what these brushes are. Impasto is exactly what it sounds like a paste. When you're painting heavily with your brush. In other words, you're taking up a substantial amount of paint, and then you're actually building on that, on the canvas. You're mixing your paints on the canvas. And it's a very thick paint. The Mona Lisa was not painted that way. However, Rembrandt and a lot of the Flemish Renaissance artists painted in a impasto style. If you were to see some of Rembrandt's portraits, you would see, if you could get up close and study, you would actually see the paint thick and goopy as he's just mixed and worked that paint on the canvas. Unlike the Mona Lisa and a lot of what you would call frescoes, they are done more in a sfumato style. What does that mean? Well, sfumato simply means smoky style. It's kind of like the early airbrush style. It was a dry brush that was used. Sfumato is very, very difficult to use in a way where if you're working on the Mona Lisa or you're doing something that's trying to simulate that in a sfumato style, your shades up close, you can barely see any change whatsoever. As soon as you step back, it pops. I mean, it's just, you can see those shadows coming out. And in doing that, it's a lot of dry brush and a lot of thin paint is what you're using. So in these types of styles that you're using, be it sfumato or impasto, is also going to relate on what kind of brush you're going to be using. All right, so as I said with these 4 brushes, these are natural brushes. And you can tell, now I know you can't, this is the part in, I would say in videos, you can't feel the differences. Now here I have a filbert. This is a synthetic brush. If you look at the brush, they look a lot alike. They really do. But in essence, they're not. Okay, so what's going to happen is that you can feel, this has got more of a slick feel to it. As you run your finger over this, it kind of slides over the brush. Here, you can feel this grip and a bounce. The brush has a tendency to bounce off the canvas. And what that does is that the paint will stay on the canvas. Here, it tends to smear. And we're going to demonstrate that on here. Using acrylic, but using a impasto style. That's basically what you want to do. You want to really get your paint in there and really work it in the canvas. Later on down the road, you could try and do a sfumato style, but that's something that you want to work on later on down the road. But you really want to get your paint in there and just really get it involved in that painting. This is the other reason why when you're working on a Bob Ross and he works in a half-hour segment, remember back then in the 90s, he was only limited to a half hour. So he had to cram all that style and everything all together in a half-hour program. We're not going to do that here as we start getting into painting techniques. As I told you, some of the paintings that I showed you from Van Gogh, Renoir, which we haven't talked about him, but all these other artists, they didn't do these paintings in half-hour increments. No, they didn't take, it wasn't one and done and whack and they were all finished. No, like I said, some of these took several years for them. They would walk away from it, they would work on it, they would build it, step back, look at it, and that's what you want to do in a painting technique. You want to be able to just build and work on that painting. And understanding your brushes are going to be a big understanding of how to make that work. Okay, here is another brush. This is also synthetic. And you can obviously tell it's synthetic, and I can feel this. This is just terrible. Oh, it has a very slick or very, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe it's because I've been using natural brushes for such a long time, but I can already tell once I put this in paint, it's just going to slide. The paint's just going to smear. It's not really going to. Now, if you're beginning, you're probably going to sit here and go, oh, I don't see any difference. I don't feel any difference at all. You probably won't, because of the fact that you haven't had that experience of working with your paints. Remember this, as you become more proficient in your paintings and you start to understand how your paints work and your brushes work, it's almost like an athlete that is very sensitive to what they're able to do. Soccer player, for instance, they have a sensitivity to the ball. They know as soon as that ball leaves their foot where it's going to curve, how it's going to arc, if it's going to go straight. They know how to make that ball spin because it's been years of being able to touch and feel that ball. A swimmer, a track runner, they can feel that foot grabbing onto the concrete, or not the concrete, but the track, and they can feel that sense of connection between their foot hitting the ground and then accelerating off of the track. A swimmer can feel the catch in the water, and you can feel that sensitivity of pull in that swimming. Same thing in painting. You feel that sense of movement. You feel that sense of that it's. I'm at the point where I can, if you were to turn around and say, okay, I'm just going to give you a bunch of brushes, you're not going to tell me what they are. If I pick up that brush, and as soon as that brush hits that canvas, or I'm starting to pick up paint, I can feel this is not a natural brush. This is a synthetic, or it's a blend. Now, the worst type of brushes that you could probably buy are these here that come in these packs. I bought a couple of these here just to show you. These are the worst, most horrendous, terrible, disgusting, hideous brushes you could purchase. If you're going to buy brushes, please don't buy these. You just might as well turn around and get a paper towel, put it on the end of a stick, and then use that. That's going to be better than this. Seriously. These are synthetic, low-grade, cheap brushes. This is the kind of brush that I would probably use on a set that I'm just going to discard and throw away. These are throwaway brushes. They're trash. And they're not something that you're going to be able to utilize in your style of painting, or when you're painting and how you're utilizing these. They come in packs, and they are just absolutely horrific. They look nice, but there's no bounce. They're dead. They are dead brushes. This I can feel. This thing just like, it just passes out. It just no bounce at all to this. It wouldn't carry ink very well. It's not going to do a watercolor very well. It's not going to hold the color, the pigment very well. And with acrylic paint, it's just not. It's just going to smear. These here are even worse. Not to also mention, these are made in China. Today, everything that we make is made in China. Even the colors that you get, and that's just disgusting. I hate to say it, but that is the worst place to buy paint from China. It really is. Your best paints that you're going to get are going to be from either Norway. They're going to be in the Flemish area. You're going to be getting them from Italy, Europe. They've been studying paint and they've been working it for hundreds and hundreds of years. But they're also very, very expensive as well. They tend to be, the pigment is going to be a lot thicker, and it's going to be a lot, there's been a lot more research done over the years. Old Holland paint can be extremely expensive. Now, we're going to get into series of paints, and depending on the series number, if it's a number 4 series, you could pay for something like this on a number 4 series. It's going to cost you about $500. Seriously, that will. You could buy series 1. It could probably cost you about $35. They're all variants in the different series, but we're going to get into that later. Okay, let's let's get into painting. Okay, so what I have here is I have a filbert. Excuse me, this is a flat 10. And I am going to just pretty much use this here to just kind of remember we're working on how to utilize these brushes, and I'm going to show you how to basically use that. I have my 3 primary colors right here, and then my white. So I'm going to use a thicker type of paint on this. All right, so I'm going to take my red, And I am going to really carry that. That is a really thick paint right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to lay that paint, and you can feel how that paint is laying out. Now, let's just do this. We'll make it into a ball style here, and then I'm going to take my white, just like that. And yes, I'm using a raw color. And I'm going to let that paint just sit on there, and then I'm going to come up with my blue. Just like that. And I'm going to add a little bit more red on here. And pull this out. All right. So, kind of giving you an idea of how this works. Now, watch what's going to happen when I use a synthetic brush. I'm going to use this synthetic brush. Now, because this is brand new, it's going to act a little differently. It's going to mimic a natural brush. But after you've used this for a while, the paint starts to stick on the bristles itself. They start to get hard and cakey, and it's not as good as you would on a synthetic brush. Now, I know you can't see it, but this is just smearing. It's got really no feel to it at all. I can feel it just sliding all over the place. Now, keep in mind, this brush is cheaper. I'm going to come up here. I'm going to add. See how that paint just swallows up right away? And then I'm going to add the blue. Right now, it's just smearing all over the place. And it's drying out real fast. I'll add some more red. Pull this up. Now, the differences between the two here, I'm going to add a little highlight there. And then with my natural brush, I'll add some highlight here. Oops. There we go. Just like that. The differences between the two of these brushes that you can feel is that this one tends to smear right here, and it just kind of like just pulls your paint around. This one here allows different textures and different feeling for your paint to come out. It takes a little practice to work with it. Now, initially, you'll probably want to jump in and you'll say, oh, well, this feels really good. It blends the paint really well. I can feel really good about it. Yeah, it's deceptive, and you will feel that at first, but if you're trying to build up into really trying to create a style and technique, you'll eventually start to fight with this one quite a bit. All right, so let's go to the next part of this, and this next part is going to be the make this pretty quick. I have a bright. Now, the bright will allow me to work. Let's use the bright tends to be short strokes, just as I'm creating here. You can't do this with the filbert. And so this is what I would highly recommend that you do, is just practice with these brushes and try utilizing color just like this. Now your bright has got these short bristles on here. That's going to allow you to be able to just pull and push that. Now, if you go to a flat, okay, you're going to end up using, actually, I'm going to use a filbert. This is going to be a filbert that I'm going to use. I can blend this out And it lets me take these long, broad strokes. And that's what a filbert does. And you can feel that glide. Then I'm going to pick up some here. Look at that. The filbert is able to just to take that, and I can feel it's not like a sliding like this paint was doing. This is just blending right into the canvas, and it feels like butter. It feels like absolute butter. Now this one here is my flat. If I'm trying to create long strokes, I can do that with the flat. Now, to some of you, you may say, well, that doesn't look much different than this. And in actuality, it's kind of hard to see this. But really, there is a difference between the two. Okay, so what I've done is I've kind of given you a demonstration on these brushes. We're going to be utilizing a lot more of the brushes and how to use these brushes and how they work when we start getting into techniques. So this is just the introduction part. Okay, so as always, may the Lord be with you. Okay, we're going to end this here at this juncture. And what you need to do again is to work on getting those 4 brushes: a filbert, a bright, a flat, and a round natural brush. And practice this. This is it. Getting some canvas and just working on it. You can even work it on canvas board if you'd like. And just practice utilizing and just let that paint go. Next episode, we're going to be talking about the pigment of acrylic. And we're going to be talking about these different types of paints, and we'll be working on that. So you take care, and God willing, we'll be back in the following week. And obviously, I'm going to be a lot better. So you take care, and we'll see you on the next episode of Artifacts.
Pantarabamba!